Good morning, rabbit lovers. Welcome to the Happy Harvest Homestead. Today I'm going to be talking about why I hate raising rabbits in cages. Now, before we start diving into all the reasons, I do want to point out that even though this video is all about why I hate raising rabbits in cages, as you can see, I have rabbits and they are in cages, so I must not hate them that much. There are lots of pros about raising rabbits in cages, and this is not a video saying you shouldn't raise rabbits in cages or there's only bad things and no good things. This video is just focusing on the bad things. So, as you guys know, I've been raising rabbits for a long time, and at first, like everybody else, I thought the only way to raise rabbits was in cages. So I built some cages and then bought some. Well, they're more like hutches, but I'm gonna kind of lump cages and hutches together in this video. So I had rabbits in cages for a long time, and I thought that was the only way you could raise rabbits. But then I was learning about other setups like colonies or tractors, and I found myself becoming discontent with just having rabbits in cages, so I tried these other setups, and I found I like them much better. Of course, there are pros and cons to both colonies and tractors too, as well as cages, good things and bad things about all the setups, but again, we're just talking about the bad things about cages in this video, and I'd be happy to tackle pros about cages or cons and pros about other setups in different videos. And I believe I actually already did this with colonies. I have reasons I love colonies, reasons I hate colonies, so I'll link them up here in the little corner, I guess, if I can. Okay, so now that all that's out of the way, let's dive into all the reasons. And the first reason why I hate having rabbits in cages is that cages are super expensive to either buy or build. You need a very specific type of wire, especially for the flooring. A while ago, I was trying to find some cage floor wire, and it was very hard to find, and when I did find some, it was crazy expensive. I think one of the main reasons why people try to cram so many rabbits into such small cages is because the cages themselves are super expensive to build. If they were cheaper, people could build larger cages for each rabbit so they have more space to run around and stuff, but everything is so expensive that especially for a beginner who's just starting out, building or buying cages is very costly, so obviously you want the most amount of rabbits for the least amount of money. So I think that's one of the reasons why people cram rabbits into such small cages, is because it's super expensive. My next reason goes along with the previous one. Because rabbit cages are so expensive, it's difficult to expand your rabbitry. So say I am a beginner rabbit breeder and I wanted a whole bunch of rabbits, but I figured out how expensive cages were, so I just built the minimum I needed: a cage for one doe, a cage for one buck, and then a cage for the kits. If one of my doe kits is really good and I really like her and I want to keep her as a breeder, then I need to buy another 2 cages, which is really expensive, in order to keep another rabbit. Whereas in other setups that are bigger, all I have to do is just keep her, and I don't have to pay a whole bunch more money to double my cage space. And so I'll just stick at the basic level, having to outsource my breeders and buy new ones instead of keeping babies myself because it's so expensive. I probably won't have a backup buck because cages are so expensive, and why just have a backup buck when I could probably just buy another buck if my buck dies? So it's more likely that you'll have a really small rabbitry and not be able to expand as much as you want to if you have cages, because they're so expensive, and also they're very hard to build. That is my next reason. Building cages, speaking from personal experience, is a nightmare. I've built tractors, which is basically like a really big cage that you put on the ground. I haven't built a cage from scratch, but I've had to modify cages a whole bunch. So basically like building a new cage out of old cage parts I already had. And oh my gosh, working with wire is one of the worst things about housing rabbits in cages. When you have to build it, the wire, you're like cutting it, it's really hard, and it keeps scraping your hands, and it doesn't behave the way you want, and it curls up on you when you're trying to roll it out. Anything with wire, which cages are a lot of the times all wire or mostly wire, is very difficult, very frustrating, and very hard. So having to build rabbit cages is definitely up there on the list of why I hate having rabbits in cages. And of course you can buy cages from people, but then they had to go through all the work and build them, or you get them secondhand and they're not really that good, and sometimes you can't buy cages and you're forced to build them, or a specific place you need them to fit and you need them to be a certain size and the standard stuff doesn't work. So even if you do end up being lucky enough to buy cages for a decent price, then good for you. But a lot of people aren't able to do that. Another reason I dislike raising rabbits in cages is a fact that I've noticed as I've had both rabbits have babies in cages and then on the ground in a colony where there's bedding. I have noticed that it's more likely for either a first-time mom who does a bad job because she doesn't know what she's doing, or a rabbit who's just a bad mom. So for whatever reason, if you have a bad mama, her kids are more likely to get cold, and then either you have to warm them up and then put them in the nest box, or die because you didn't get to them in time because they're too cold, if they're in cages than if they're in a colony. The reason for this is, rabbit cages, you just have all cage, and it's all wire, and then you give a mom a nest box, and some hay or straw or whatever bedding you like, and you dictate to the rabbit where she's going to give birth, and maybe she doesn't like the nest box, maybe your nest box is too shallow. If you think about it, a rabbit in the wild will dig a burrow where it's completely sealed off and completely dark and safe, and if you compare that with a nest box that is sometimes barely big enough for a rabbit to turn around in, and it's exposed to the light a lot, you can see why a lot of rabbits have problems giving birth in a nest box because it's so unlike what naturally they would be using. So a lot of times with having rabbits in cages, you have issues with them wanting to use your nest box that you gave to them, and then they'll give birth on the wire. Sometimes they make a nest on the wire, and that's a really bad thing, or they just don't make a nest at all and give birth on the wire and the kids get cold. Sometimes you're able to salvage the situation and warm them back up again and put them in the nest box and pull fur from her or use cotton balls or something because it's an emergency and the kids are going to die. But I have found that having that problem happens a lot in cages, whereas in colonies I've had many first-time mamas and I've had many bad mamas, and there's bedding all in the colony, and there's the ability to dig burrows. We're able to have our nest boxes be much more like an actual burrow because we have enough room in there for that. In a small cage, you don't have room for a tote with a tunnel in it. It's just too small. And you guys know we've had our fair share of bad mamas who don't nurse their babies, or don't pull fur for them, or don't pull enough fur for them. But in our colony, the bad mamas are more likely to make a nest, or at least make a little area in the straw to have their babies, which is much safer and better for the babies because they have a more natural setup and are able to do what they would more naturally do than us forcing them to use some junky nest box in an all-wire cage. And of course, you guys know I have had mama rabbits who are in a colony and still don't make a nest in a nest box or dig a burrow or even, make a little nest in the straw. They just scatter their kids everywhere in the colony. One of the rabbits we used to have, Rosie, I think it was one of either her last litter or one of her last litters that happened. So of course, having a more natural setup with bedding doesn't guarantee you to not have that problem, but I found that over the years with multiple rabbits, that problem is just far less likely than it is in cages. Then, speaking of having an all-wire floor, that brings us to our next problem, why I hate raising rabbits, is because there's an increased risk of sore hocks. Now, about this point, I'll probably have a whole bunch of people telling me, oh, I've been raising rabbits for 40 years and I've never had issues with sore hocks. And to that I say, that is great. I'm so glad that you were so lucky. But personally, I've had experience with sore hocks a lot with cages. And then some people will say, well, you just have the wrong type of floor wire, so that's the problem. And if you have the correct gauge and size of floor wire, then you won't have any issues with sore hocks. And then some other people might say, oh, well, you just happen to have bad rabbits. Some rabbits are more prone to sore hocks than others, and you just have to cull the bad ones and keep the good ones. And then to both of those questions, I would say, you're right. You're completely right. Having good floor wire decreases your chance of sore hocks, as well as having rabbits who are, I guess, genetically less prone to that. But there are plenty of people who don't know about having the proper type of wire. And even myself, I've had pretty good wire floor cages, and I still had some rabbits getting sore hocks. Oh, and for those who don't know, sore hocks are just sores on the bottom of the rabbit's feet. The hock is the foot, kind of, so a foot sore on the rabbit caused from being on the wire all the time. And then some people say, oh, just put some cardboard or a tile down there, and they'll fix your problem. I still have had rabbits have sore hocks when I had really good wire and also good tile. And of course you could say, yeah, just cull them and get rid of them and get a better rabbit. But then you have to take this breeder who's really good with everything else and get rid of it just because of sore hocks, when you could have a different setup and not have to deal with that problem at all. When you have rabbits on the ground, you don't really deal with sore hocks. I mean, I guess it's possible if you have a tractor that has wire on the bottom to kind of prevent them from being able to dig out, then them walking on the wire, even though it's the wire's on the ground, then that could be a possibly bad thing and cause sore hocks. But for sure, having rabbits just plain on the ground without having wire on top of that, I haven't had an issue with that. And of course, there are ways to minimize the risk, and sometimes you just have to breed for whatever you want. And if you want rabbits in cages who are resistant to sorehawks, then breed for that. But in all honesty, if I'm going to take the time and effort and trouble to breed my own line of rabbits, I don't want to breed them for resistance to sorehawks. I want to breed them for increased size or increased hardiness or good mothering skills or something far more important. And having to go through a whole bunch of breeders who are perfectly good except for the fact that they get sorehawks in cages, and spending all that time and effort and money and worry and stress. So that's why I prefer raising rabbits in a setup where sorehawks are not a potential problem. Then, speaking of wire, brings me to our next problem, which is that little kits, little baby rabbits' feet, there's a possibility that they will get caught in the wire. I've heard horror stories where kits have got their feet really caught in the wire, and like they had to dispatch the kit because it got so badly caught. And in my own personal experience, I've had kits who just come out of the nest box and they're walking around and their feet accidentally get caught a little bit, then they fix it themselves. That has happened to me for sure. I was watching it once and it was like stuck for a few seconds, and my heart stopped and I was so scared, but then it got unstuck all by itself and it was fine. Or maybe I did have to unstick it, I don't remember, but I think it was all by itself. But that is a risk you take when you have rabbits on wire, especially when you have little babies. And of course, there are plenty of people who have never had that issue and never dealt with it at all, and that's great. They're so lucky. I'm so glad for them. But I personally have dealt with that. But even for me, most of the time, that's not an issue at all, and it's fine. And as you guys know, I'm planning on breeding my Angoras and letting Jolty have babies on wire, and they're going to be on wire, and I've done it before, I'm going to do it again. I'm not that worried about it, but it is something you have to worry about, and it's another hassle that's possible that you can easily avoid if you have rabbits living not in cages. Something else I don't really appreciate about having rabbits in cages is because they're in such a small area and they poop like regular rabbits do, you get a very high concentration of poop under the cages. If you have like pans under your cages to catch the poop, you have to keep cleaning those out all the time. If you just let the poop fall to the floor, then under there it'll be like all gross and poopy. If you have like a special ramp or chute that the poop falls through the cages and then goes on the chute, it still is going to smell really bad because it's just raw poop and pee. Especially right now in our colony, it is so nice. We have less rabbits in there than we have capacity for, and because the area they have is so big, all their poop gets spread out and doesn't smell bad at all. There's no high concentration. Every once in a while, by the hay feeder where they all sit and poop a lot, I'll cover it with a little bit more straw. But for the most part, I'm not putting down huge amounts of straw to keep them clean like I was, especially when we had a whole bunch of babies in there. And that minimal amount of poop spread out over a wide area is in stark contrast to the huge amounts of poop put in a very small area that will require a lot of upkeep because there's so much poop in such a small area versus having the same amount of poop spread out over a wide area. At this point, you guys may be wondering, why am I not talking about one of the main pinch points of having rabbits in cages that a lot of people don't like, but I'm saving the best for last. And so we're going now to the ones that aren't super important, but are still problems, but they're not super important ones. But this next issue is that rabbit cages are loud when rabbits, are moving around or hopping in metal cages that bang against each other. It's loud. I guess if you have hutches that are mostly wood and some wire, it won't be that loud. But if you have all wire cages, especially if you have toys in there or resting mats that can bounce up and down, when the rabbits are hop or moving or hopping, you can hear the bouncing. In our cages, we have tiles in there for resting mats. And Jolty, she'll run up and down her big long cage, and the wire moves and it bumps against the tile and it makes this really annoying loud noise. So loud cages is something I do not like about having rabbits in cages. Okay, this one is actually pretty important. Having rabbits in cages is very labor intensive, and you have to micromanage everything. When you have maybe 1 or 2 rabbits and some babies, it's not that big of a deal. But if you have a bigger rabbitry with multiple rat breeders in cages and multiple babies and litters and grow out cages, and chore time gets very, very long. Each cage needs water. Each cage needs food. Each cage, if you're doing hay, each cage needs hay. If you are doing hay, then each cage needs to be cleaned out. You pick up the hay that fell on the floor wire. Each nest box needs to be checked. then you close the cage door, then move on to the next cage, do the food, do the water, do the hay, check the nest box. It gets very long, labor-intensive for just even daily chores. And then you come to the whole breeding and weaning thing. You are in charge of the breeding. Then you put the rabbits in, and you have to watch them the whole time. And then ideally the breeding is great, and it just takes like 15 minutes, and you take them back out, and you're good. But then sometimes the doe is running around a whole bunch, you have to hold her still, or the buck isn't interested, and you have to come back the next day and try again. There's a whole bunch of problems that people face with breeding in cages, and it's really frustrating and hard. Much harder than how I have it in my colony. The buck is just with the does all the time, and I just find babies every once in a while, and it's so great. Then after the ordeal of breeding is done, you have to go on your calendar and mark that down. Then mark down when you need the nest box in, and then remember on that day, oh yeah, I need to put the nest box in. So you put that in, and then you're waiting for babies, checking every day, super worried. Then when the babies come out of the nest box, you worry that their feet will get caught. So you put stuff down, but the mama eats the hay off the ground, so you put the cardboard down, but mama's chewing the cardboard. Then comes the point where you wean them. You have to take them out of the cage, but you leave one in so that mama can, dry up her milk, and then a few days later, you take that one out, and then you're rebreeding her, and it's just so labor intensive, and you are in charge of everything. Whereas in a colony setup, I just check the nest boxes every day. If there's babies, great. And then, of course, I check on the babies, and I make sure they come out of the nest box good, but it's not nearly as labor intensive as breeding rabbits and having babies and checking on babies and weaning babies in the cages. Okay, I think we've come to the very end, which is the biggest one. Is it even ethical to raise rabbits in cages? As we already discussed, cages are super expensive to build, so most people give the rabbits the minimum amount of space possible so they can cram as many rabbits in as possible for the least amount of money. From a business standpoint, that makes a whole bunch of sense, right? But then from an actual caring for your animals that God has given you to steward point of view, then there's a whole bunch of problems with doing it that way. Now, of course, there are people like myself who have their rabbits in really big cages, and then they bring them out to exercise all the time, and that is great. But most people who have rabbits in cages don't really do that. Most rabbit cages are 2 feet by 2 feet or 2 feet by 3 feet, and they are very small, much too small for a rabbit to do most anything a rabbit does when it's allowed to be its natural self. There's no ability to run or do zoomies or binkies or even hop properly. There's no room to even lay down to your full extent. The rabbit can have his face pressed up against the wire on one side, and then his feet pressed up against the wire on the other side of the cage. There's not enough room to stretch out. The rabbit can't even stand up all the way on its hind feet. And then you think of the poor mama rabbits who in that space they have to have a nest box in there, which takes up half of their cage space, so they can barely even have room to sit by themselves without being squished by a nest box. Then when you have the nest box and half a dozen kits running around trying to nurse on you all the time, and you have 4 square feet of space to be in, almost half of which is being taken up by your nest box. I mean, it's crazy how people don't bat an eye at that. But if you replace those rabbits with a dog, you would say that's animal abuse. That's not okay. If you replace those rabbits with cats, the same thing. If you replace those rabbits with pigs, no way are you going to keep a pig on an all-wire cage with it and its piglets just in that small of a space. But with rabbits, it's fine. It seems kind of silly to me. Now, as you guys know, I used to have rabbits in really small cages too. I had 1 rabbit per cage, and I'd have a nest box and a mama and all these babies. I can speak from personal experience to tell you guys how really cramped and small it can get in there. I thought that was the only way someone could raise rabbits because that was all I was taught. When I was researching about rabbits, I didn't know that there was any other way. Everyone kept saying how bad all the other ways were and how good cages were, so I thought that was the only way you could do it. But now that I have experienced the flip side of having rabbits in so much room, letting them be their rabbity selves and dig and run and hop and stretch up on their hind legs and stretch out and roll around in the dirt, I am never putting my meat rabbits back in cages. Of course, you guys know about the time when I was remodeling my colony and I had to temporarily put all my rabbits from the colony into cages for a day or 2 as I was rebuilding it, and I may have to do that again. But if I had to choose between raising meat rabbits permanently in cages and not raising meat rabbits at all, I would choose the latter option. I would rather focus my time on stewarding other types of animals well, like chickens or goats, to get our meat, than steward rabbits poorly to get our meat. So now you guys may be wondering why, if I don't like rabbit cages so much and I think it's stewarding rabbits poorly to have them in cages, do I have rabbits in cages? I've explained this before, but in case you don't remember, these are Angora rabbits, and their fiber is long and gets tangled very easily, and if they were on the floor with dirt or grass or bedding, it would get wet, get stuff all in it, and be a nightmare to take care of. We only have 2 of them, so I'm able to better give them large cage spaces and exercise them regularly. We do plan on having a few litters with them perhaps in the spring, summer, and possibly even fall. But while they will be, hopefully just temporarily, our main meat source, they are primarily supposed to be fiber rabbits, so their purpose for being on this homestead is completely different than the meat rabbits. If I raised all my meat rabbits in cages, I would have to have so many of them that I wouldn't be able to give them big cages. It'd be too expensive. And I wouldn't be able to give them exercise because there would be so many of them that even if I did a rabbit every day, it'd probably be like weeks in between each rabbit's exercise time. So for the amount of meat rabbits we need to give our family enough meat, I would not be able to give them big enough cages or give them enough exercise time like I do for the Angoras. And then this brings us to my final problem with rabbit cages. It goes along with having the cages be too small. Not only is having rabbits in very small cages being a poor steward of the animals God has given you to take care of, but it causes more problems for you. Speaking from experience, having rabbits in small cages means they will be more likely to be aggressive. They're more likely to bite you or grunt at you, lunge at you, try to claw you, because they are in a very small space with no places to hide, no place to run away or get away from you. They become very territorial of their very small space because there's not really any other option. They're not used to sharing with other rabbits like they are in a colony. In a colony, you can't be very territorial on your space because you can't ever protect your space completely from everybody else. Maybe mamas will protect their nest box areas a little bit, but then once their babies leave, they stop protecting that place. But rabbits in cages, they're stuck in this very small area, and they can become very territorial. And then they're already unhappy because they're stuck in this tiny cage. And then you come in, often smelling like other rabbits because you've been doing their chores. You come in with your big hand. They can't run away from you. They don't have anywhere to hide. They're stuck. They're trapped in this tiny space. They're already in a bad mood. And you come in smelling like a different rabbit into their territory and mess with their food and water and hay, mess with their nest box. There's no wonder why some rabbits will bite you or claw you or grunt at you. You guys may remember Lolo. She used to be the most mean, scared rabbit I have ever dealt with. Every time you'd come, put your hand into her cage, she would bite you, claw you, growl at you. It was the worst thing ever. Now, you guys might be surprised because this was all before I was doing YouTube, and the Lolo is calm and nice and friendly, and that's because we switched her to a colony. When she was in her cage, she was a monster. And then we put her in the colony where she had a place to get away if she was in a bad mood and didn't want to be with you. She had places to hide if she was scared. She wasn't stuck in a small cage. She was forced to share her space with other rabbits. She wasn't very territorial. She was happy. She was given the space and the room she needed to run around. And she would come up to you for pettings. You'd hand feed her. She'd never attacked me. She'd never bit me, clawed me, scratched me. I would hold her babies all the time, and I would check her nest boxes. She didn't even care. She was so good once she was in a colony. If I remember correctly, I think having her be a mother mellowed her out a lot as well. And then if I'm remembering correctly, Rosie, one of our other meat rabbit does, was the same way. When we first brought her home, we quarantined her in a cage. Oh, maybe you guys don't remember that. Was that before I was doing YouTube? I don't remember. I think that might have been before I was doing YouTube. Anyway, she was in a cage, and I recall her being very mean and unkind. She was kind of that personality. And then when she was in her colony, though, she mellowed out nicely as well. So this concludes my video about why I hate rabbit cages and having rabbits in cages. This is not an exhaustive list. I wrote down everything I could think of, but I probably, after I'm making this and editing this, I'll probably think of more that I wish I put in. So this is not the complete list, but this is a pretty good list of the reasons I don't like having rabbits in cages. I hope you guys enjoyed this, maybe learned something. Thanks for watching.